Morning, Dennis. Thought I'd see a few other people here.
Anyone else around?
No idea. Anyway. So we've got the letter from Hunts anyway, which I haven't looked at yet, but presumably we can modify it and upload it.
Sure.
And I haven't looked either at Gareth sent us some, I don't know, some instruction things to look at for guest editors. So we need to have a look at those.
Yes, and we need a letter to authors as well as to
yeah, indeed. Have you looked at the stuff that Gary sent yet?
No.
Right. Well, that makes two of us. So.
Oh, you're right to expect data this morning. I know I missed it last week because it had dodged to an early time.
I thought we were back at I've still got it in my diary as this time. I mean, there was on the Slack channel, Lorenzo uploaded something today. I mean, everybody's been beavering away on the Dropbox in the last hour.
Yeah.
So I sort of thought it felt like, you know, that activity that you get before a meeting. It's only sort of a minute or so past, I suppose, but
no, yes, could drop Nigel a line. I mean, the most recent thing seems to be his integrated version.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was reading it earlier, and he and Glenn kept popping up as readers of the file and so on. So.
Morning.
Oh, suddenly got lots of people.
Perhaps there's some convention about joining at 4 minutes past that we're not aware of.
I don't know. Everybody joined simultaneously anyway, which is good. We were beginning to wonder if we were in the wrong place.
Right. Yeah, my computer decided it had to shut down, which was a bit unfortunate.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, just winding up another piece of admin. There we go. Well, welcome. Thank you very much. Here we are. Another week has gone. How can that be? You can't see me. I just noticed the cameras.
But we can hear, which is the main thing.
This is a blessed relief. As of the video, it's obviously switched to the FaceTime camera, which is buried away. There we go. Okay, there we go. Okay. Well, just as I was typing away last night, Richard was typing away. So thank you for that work, Richard. I sent an email around. Thank you, Dennis, for the pointer to the RSS report. I mean, kind of that was helpful too. We're in a position. What I'd done is place a document inside the on the Dropbox, which is trying to get a bit closer to the challenges and recommendation format. And whether in looking at that, because Richard had very helpfully put a number of the challenges we discussed last week throughout the document and expanded one or two areas. We're now around about 8,000 words. I guess bigger and bigger, it's topsy. But the question I wanted to discuss is whether gathering the recommendations I mean, it makes sense in some cases because some of the recommendations are quite detailed in areas like data engineering, to interleave them with the challenges as we encounter them, whether that works as a format, because I think we could convert quite a lot of the paper to that format. I think it's very helpful. It might be a little bit artificial in places, but I think, to Valerie's point, really trying to crystallize the recommendations seemed to be important. And then Lorenzo reminded us last week, does the structure feel right? So I'm looking at the paper again, and I welcome your comments on this. We set out our scene and then go into a data engineering perspective. And in a certain sense, that introduces all the FAIR principles, which I think we can now build out quite nicely, particular recommendations off of those. Then into the lived experience of coronavirus, the pandemic data challenges, and then into the more generic issues. And there's a question whether that is the right fundamental ordering, whether you might do better to kind of talk about the immediate COVID experience and then draw all the lessons from a data engineering perspective, from a platforms perspective, from a policies perspective, and so on. So I'm in your hands, really, because I think there are a number of ways with the amount of content we've got that we can refactor this or carry on as. Glenn, have you put your hand up? No.
No.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. I misread that. You just highlighted in the middle of my screen in a dramatic fashion. So, yeah, I don't know whether people have had a chance. Richard, you put quite a lot of you've expanded not just the challenge points, but a number of the items in any event, I noticed. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, after the discussion last week where it was mentioned that some of the other chapters some of the other papers had interleaved the challenges, I just thought I'd just try doing it and see what happened.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was really the motivation for it. I thought it would be easier to make a decision if we actually saw what it would look like if we did that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I actually think it works quite well. There are a lot of challenges. But yeah, I thought it worked. I couldn't quite decide when I started. You kind of get carried away with these things. When I started putting this down, I wasn't sure in the end whether it wouldn't make sense to interleave the actual lived experience, insofar as it was relevant, into that as well, and break it down even more. You did end up with the kind of sectioning system of kind of 8.1.1.2 and things like that. It started to get quite agonizing. Anyway, I wondered whether if we were going to go down that road, we should just do the whole thing and interleave the kind of fundamental point that we're trying to make, and then what happened this year, and then what we think the recommendations and challenges are for each section as we went through.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, I mean, it made it certainly, as I was beginning to look at the model I took your paper and then took 8.1 as the challenge, around the FAIR principles, and realized that, although we described them, we haven't said, well, what's the challenge in this? And so what would we recommend? And I was very struck by the fact that we living in the data world might think these are all nicely understood, but there's still a big issue about their deployment. Things like schema.org, nobody's publishing really, as far as I can see, their data adopting a search metadata.
I have to be brutally honest about this. As somebody who pretends some of the time to live in a data world, and I've had this conversation multiple times now, I still have no idea what schema.org is.
There you go.
Sorry.
So we need to.
People just keep on bringing it up as this thing we ought to be doing, and it's like, yeah, it sounds like a website.
Well,
and I've never had time to look into it. So there's a lot of it.
Yeah, well, check. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think that at various moments people have got excited about just how much data is being annotated in schema.org, so that you can actually get the search engines to pay attention to it, or at least the web pages that have the descriptors of the metadata. I mean, it's a way of bridging your point around how you find, at least make the metadata available, even if it's sensitive data sets, and then you can kind of get, to some extent, bring it to the attention of the search engines. So we can, rather than having the argument here, we can kind of probably thrash that out a bit in the development of the actual chapter sections. So yeah, there is a point then about whether we think that challenge recommendation, interleaving them at quite a fine grain, is going to at least help us pull out the salient points consistently throughout the whole paper. There will be quite a few of them, as people say. I mean, I don't know. Do people have a strong view on this, Valerie?
Yeah, I was very interested in that, because yes, I think it does work better, for me at least. I liked what Richard had done, and I thought, you know, bringing them out as we go along seemed to fit. But the other thing that he mentioned, which I'd also thought of, was sort of using the material that's currently in 8.2, interleaving that with 8.1 as examples. Yeah. Because at the moment we've got these general principles, and then all of a sudden we go to lived experience. Yeah. And it seemed to me, well, firstly, that a lot of that actually fits much better in the modelling and estimation papers. So I'd be very interested to see what Ben and Glenn think of that. But I think some of that material about the use of data and models and so on doesn't really fit terribly well here, and would fit better there. But the other stuff would much more work as good examples of why we need the sort of structures and principles, or why we haven't got them, and so on. And also, I suppose the other thing would be the extent to which one can say something about what's going on elsewhere, and not just in the UK, or what has gone on elsewhere in terms of data. Yeah. So there's quite a few different bits points there. Yeah. But
I'm just making some notes on that. Yeah, okay, as we go. Yeah, I think the point about section 8.2, which was very important to us, data and models, you know, like the COVID experience, the interplay between data and models, I think is crucial. And I can see why you might think some of those insights have a role in the estimation and modeling papers, because of course, you know, it's a common thread that is transverse across all of those papers. But if we just detach the data modeling, the data engineering principles from the actual models they're in the service of, I think you lose some really strong insights, which are in there. Maybe we can, but as you say, if we redistribute them, make them the use cases that illustrate the point around quality, linkage, reusability, interoperability. Yeah. That's your point, isn't it? Yeah.
It is really, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there may be a bit more detail than you actually need, but I think by making them examples of what's happened, and you know, as they would illustrate a lot of the points that Richard is making, and perhaps bring it to life a bit.
Lorenzo.
So in this respect, I'm also trying to participate in the estimation paper, and there are unavoidably some overlaps, and partially they touch me in particular because I try to use the data to estimate something with a model, and so that's all the contact with the data I have. So I was just trying to put some stuff in the section 8.2 about the models and data, and I was struggling at the end, so I just put for other reasons I'll tell you now, but I just decided to put it on another kind of document that I put in the Dropbox. So I use the data for estimation, and so I'm struggling in understanding what goes here and what goes in the other paper. But at the same time, I suspect there will be a natural overlap, but also some of the things that I found were important challenges during this pandemic, somewhat also don't appear to the estimation paper directly. We were trying to fit their stuff with Chris yesterday. We are struggling a little bit because it's very uncertainty quantification focused. But we had this discussion with Ben and Glenn. So let's not have it now. In my mind, if I were to kind of highlight slight differences between what I would write in one place and what I would write in the other, but some challenges are challenges of the data, and some challenges are challenges of the estimation. So, for example, the fact that the data I receive is truncated, is right censored and truncated as we get closer to now. It's an estimation challenge. If we're going to estimate a parameter, I have to take into account the fact that some people have arrived in hospital but have not left yet. And so I need to kind of account that when I try to estimate some length of stay in hospital, rather than being a problem with the data. There's nothing that can be done with the data. The data arrives at some point. We can speed it up at the speed at which it arrives, but there's very little you can do about the data. And instead, when the data is recorded with missingness, and I'm not told what is missing, that's a problem with the data. It's a problem with the source. Or if the data is not publicly available, that's another data issue. And so I suspect, even if we write a section about models and data, there is a part that is more data related, and there's a part that is more estimation related. And if you know that there are some problems with the data, but at least you know them, you can try to account for them and make the model more robust so that it doesn't suffer. It doesn't do a wrong job at estimating parameters, because it accounts for the fact that you know that the data has these problems and you try to compensate for those.
Yeah. You see, I think the point you made in your standalone paper, really, there's some really interesting points there from a data life cycle management and if you like, a point of view. And you wouldn't want to lose some of those insights by saying, oh, go and read about it in the modeling or the estimation paper. Yeah, yeah.
I was trying to focus exactly on the data. Yeah, as much as possible. I mean, it's not perfect. It had to be remodeled. What I found it difficult, the reason why I wrote it as a standalone, is I found it difficult to decide. There were 3 subsections in section 8.2, and one was about what has happened in this pandemic. The second one was something more about like what data was available in this pandemic, then something about data and models, and then what have we learned as a lesson. And what I tried to write in that paragraph is that, especially at the beginning, the fact that data wasn't public, well, certain data cannot be publicly available to start with, but the sooner you get some publicly available data, the better for everybody. And that is both, I don't know, that falls both under what data is available, how do you use data for doing anything with models, and what lesson we've learned. And so I didn't really know exactly how to split it, but I suspect,
well, you know, we can think about that, because I think that issue of data availability, open data, I mean, it's a thing that came through heavily in the RSS report. It's something that we've noted in a number of places in our own chapter, and this is the actual evidential reason in the actual pandemic why we understand that to be the case. So it does all cohere. It is just about moving material around.
Exactly. I suspect it can be done with a bit of care, but I didn't really have time to write and to kind of read everything.
That's right. Yeah, Richard, you're muted. Sorry.
I was really just going to agree with Lorenzo that and I think that data quality is a particular thing that is nicely spans all 3 kind of modeling, estimation, and data. That the data people, you know, have to focus on annotating the data well enough that we understand what's missing, and the modeling and the estimation people have to be able to handle missing data or poor quality data. And I think that it should appear in all 3 chapters, issues like data quality. That's all.
Okay. Well, we're making lots and lots of challenges for ourselves. This is a challenging paper in this regard, just knowing how you interleave stuff together and how we structure. We're still being kind of talking about this for a number of weeks now. I think we've got a proposal here, though, which we might look quite strongly to try and take the challenge recommendation interleaving that Richard introduced and then I developed a little bit, and try and do that to the point at which, I mean, whether 8.2 distributes across the rest of the chapter is what, or paper, sorry, is what rather than staying as a discrete chunk in the middle where you read and get, oh, now I'm reading about COVID. And that'll be the challenge. But I think for the readability, and to Valerie's point, that if we can pull off this trick of, I'm reading about data, I'm reading about the data challenges, talked about the FAIR principles. Oh, here's the example of what they're talking about here. And here's a COVID exemplar. That would be nice. But we just have written 8.2 to be a little bit freestanding as well. I mean, it's got some quite, you know, it's got its own internal logic. So, gosh, at some point you say, well, we've got all these great contributions. Maybe we've got entirely the wrong structure. I don't know.
Obviously, doing that, I think, is a relatively big job to sort of.
It is a big job. It is a big job. So.
We could sort of agree to try and do it for next week and see how it looks, I guess. See if it's possible.
Well, that's where we might need to get to. I mean, because I think it'll be and how we do that in our different way, how we parcel that out in such a way that it gets done. It is a big job.
Maybe now's a good time just to mention that so last week I tried to add something because I couldn't make the meeting, and with the revision issues it didn't get flagged, I don't think. But I was wondering whether we might want to have a table or something which sort of tried to list the types of data that we would ideally like to see in the next pandemic. And I haven't done it as a table, but I've done it as text. But I.
No, I saw that. That's in there. That's nice. Yeah.
But then if we are going to do that, I'm not quite sure where that would fit if it's not in 8.2. Maybe it just goes into 8.3 perhaps. But.
Yeah, I thought some, oh, sorry, I haven't got my hand up. I was just going to say, I thought some of 8.2.4, which is about future data in the COVID section, would merge in with 8.3 and presumably also your table, because it's talking about, you know, future structures.
Okay. Yeah, I think at one point I did try and rewrite 8.3 to include 8.2.4.
Did it not work?
Well, I kind of got stuck, but that may be just because I did.
I mean, if you could, I mean, he says, if you could, that would really, I think, make 8.3 slightly more accessible in the context of people who are thinking about, well, what does this mean for, you know, the next pandemic? I mean, these are all very nice, these kind of integrated life cycles, but what does that actually mean? What would that actually look like? Why would they need to do it? And in the context of these missing assets, that could do it quite well. Yeah. I mean, if that were possible, and I think then the challenge for us is to work out whether if we try and do the challenge recommendation element, that if we go through the paper and try and do that for 8.1, 8.2, we look at it and say, okay, we can now see how to pull those all together or keep them as still fundamentally separate sections. I think that would be a challenge. Lorenzo, is that your hand up still? Yeah.
Yes. So I wanted to say, I only very briefly read the beginning of the paper until I arrived at the place where I thought I would put my bit. And I quite liked, at least up to that point, what Richard tried to do in terms of rewriting and pulling out the challenges. The other thing I want to say is, I don't remember anymore. Yes, at the beginning there was someone has written something about the fact that it was striking in this pandemic how quickly data was collected and pulled together and made publicly available. And they quote like Our World in Data website and other website of that sort. And I thought it's true. The amount of publicly available data is quite large. Whether that data is what is often needed for early epidemiological model, that's another matter.
Yeah.
And so it has been, it was great according to the FAIR principles. But we found extremely useful from the beginning, like a simple line list of cases that had been contacted, sorry, that have been detected as cases, and that were, and with their travel history when they went to Wuhan and so on. Because even a crappy data set like that with a partial metadata in a GitHub repository of some sort, that was extremely influential because you could work out, for example, time from infection to onset of symptoms, because you knew that person went to Wuhan a particular day and then developed symptoms 5 days later. And then that allows you to kind of understand a bit more about the intervals between events in infection history. And that was particularly helpful. Now, I don't really know when our world in data started or what data it collected, but for example, I know that the Johns Hopkins University has deaths and confirmed cases for every country. For they had it for a long time and so on, and that has been extremely helpful to understand, for example, the speed at which the cases were growing, the speed at which the deaths were growing. But they are very biased data streams. So any sort of hospital data stream will be more helpful because it's less biased. And hospital data was only available from Italy. So these are the things that I wrote in my section. I basically found a slight discrepancy between saying this pandemic is great, data has been made available very, very early on this really wonderful repositories of data publicly available. But to me, that was either it's still too late because the very, very early response comes from data that people typically don't have access to, or very crowdsourced data put together without really, I'm not sure exactly the quality on how much it respects the FAIR principles. And so whether the early crappy data is more influential than data that arrives later on that is done with all the beauty of the FAIR principles, it's unclear. And also what kind of, how influential data that is publicly available but does not necessarily inform the critical parts of the model is. So I agree that there is a lot of publicly available data, but I was struggling. My experience at the very beginning of this pandemic was different from, wow, we have all this amount of data available. That was completely different. So there was a bit of a clash. So who wrote that section? I would be very interested in hearing your opinion.
Yeah, Richard and Alice. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I'm just going to let Alice talk. I've completely forgotten what I
Yes.
If I can remember now. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, actually, about the reality. You know, so my opinion is that in a sort of crisis, that it isn't the meeting all of these principles for the sake of it isn't what's important. You need to think about what's actually important out of there, and it might be that some bits of FAIR, like, you know, it's important for you to be able to do that urgent work, that you were able to find that data, for instance. So the F is important and it's accessible, right? It's not so important that it's publicly, you know, or that it's in a format that didn't require any effort to use, or this kind of thing was less important. It was more that it was quickly accessible. And the places where the FAIR principles, I would have said, were more important in SCRC, we were thinking about it very much from the point of view of like trust in the derived results, I guess, trust in the modelling results and the conclusions that you reach. So FAIR being applied to like all the things you do from that point. Maybe you've got this very rough and ready, crappy input data set, but from that point onwards, you can sort of provide, even in some very low tech way, without a dedicated platform, you can make sure you can trace where your conclusions came from and that kind of thing. That is still applying the FAIR principles, right? It's, yeah.
I think it's really important that we recognize reality and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and also recognize that all these assets that look like they're really well engineered may not be just what people are using in the first instance. So that's where this kind of experience from Lorenzo and Jasmine and the rest is really, really important, I think.
Yeah.
before I have got to chair a board meeting, I propose, I mean, please stay, I mean, the call's in for an hour, and please do discuss whether you think this refactoring we're talking about is something could we meet next week? I've got a clear hour next week, 10:30, if we could meet next week and try and execute on, I would at least say this, we do carry on the discussion, to accommodate Lorenzo's point, try and find where we can drop some of those insights in to try and move 8.2.4 into 8.3. If we could ask Glenn perhaps to look at that, that would be great. And for the in the meantime, be looking at trying to work on the paper to take the whole issue of challenge recommendation. I just took the simple method of boldening them and putting challenge recommendation where I could find them. Now that might overpopulate lots of challenges and lots of recommendations as the whole thing comes together. The issue of whether we interleave 8.2 and 8 or distribute 8.2 across the whole paper is something I think that's too big to achieve in one step. So I think we need to be thinking about that. Does that make sense? That suggestion. I'm not. I just have to hop off now. But I mean, if Richard would like to take the kind of, if you've got more time to devote to this, a bit more time, Richard, to try and pull those thoughts together, would that be okay?
I can have a go at doing some of that work. I mean, it won't be the next couple of days because I've got a couple of other
No, but I'm just suggesting that, if I have to literally go off the call now. If I do,
I see, right now.
Just to carry on. Yeah. If you want to carry on the discussion. All right. Yeah.
Yep.
Are people happy? Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I won't be there next week, but I feel like if anyone's doing a bit of restructuring and can give me a steer about those points would be usefully contributed.
We're still trying to keep the weekly cadence going, Valerie. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. If people, it's entirely up to if people find it useful.
Are people finding this okay? I mean, we are making progress. We're getting more material. I think the question will be fundamentally structuring it in a way that brings the challenge recommendation elements out and meets this issue of being accessible to those people who are primarily modelers and accessible to those people who are worrying about this from the data curation point of view. Yeah. Okay. I was always on the cosh on this one, but I will then we'll convene 10:30 to 11:30. That's clear my day for next week, and we will. It's April Fool's Day, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do carry on, and just drop a note to circulate, because I've made some notes around the points we've agreed to date. Okay. Yep. Thanks. Cheers.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Lorenzo, it sounds like you have.
Yeah, probably it's a question probably for Glenn. Richard, you might also be able to address it, but I thought you were covering other sections that were more on the data and less on the modeling. There are a few in the bullet point list I put at the top. There are still a couple of things that I'm not sure whether they appear anywhere. I can write some text on them, but I was wondering whether Glenn has an obvious idea where these concepts could go.
Which ones are you thinking of?
I'm talking about the data that changes meaning over time. I think it's already mentioned somewhere. For example, the testing at the beginning and the testing. If you plot all the confirmed cases over time, you get a really, really tiny first wave and a huge second wave just because the testing has changed over time. This could also be, that's the second bullet point at the top. That could also be like when you try to compare different countries, the concept of deaths in different countries is different. You might think that you just record deaths and that's very easy, but once you start asking what a COVID death is, good luck with that. And I don't know whether there is an obvious place for that in your opinion, or whether it was already mentioned somewhere. It would have helped if I had managed to kind of read the current draft of the paper.
Yeah, I mean, so your list is, so I have a version of 8.3 which is offline, and your list is in there to incorporate these points, but I haven't done it.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
My general feeling is that this question about data changes meaning over time, I think that for me, the challenge or the recommendation is that somehow we should get better at recording what I keep calling the denominator population. So, basically, if standard data collection involved recording information that would allow you to assess these issues.
So it's a metadata somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same issue as the missingness issue. It affects everyone. The data people have to be better at annotating their data to explain that it's changed meaning, and the modeling people have to get better at being able to represent different data sets in different parts. I know that, I mean, I am actually a modeler. I'm not a data person, honestly. Okay. But I know as a modeler that it's one of the most horrifying things that happens to me is that the data changes under me, and I have to basically write these models that half the time, the first month of it or the first 10 years of the data mean this, and then the next 10 years the data mean this, and then the 6 months where it means a third thing, and then I just want to. Yeah,
and it goes all the way across, like all of those different bits of the life cycle. That problem everyone needs to be like aware of and addressing it, don't they? So you can do things in your data engineering to try to mitigate it, and you can do things in your data curation and annotation, and you can do things as a modeler to find quantities that will be less prone to it, or yeah.
And it also fits in the kind of data model cycle.
Yeah,
because for example, the other thing that strikes me, that the lack of the denominator, as Glenn mentioned it, for example, lots of people record how many cases get infected in households, for example, and they ask you, so what's the transmission rate in households? And you're like, if you only had asked also how many people there are in that household, that would make my life a little bit easier, because if you don't tell me who doesn't get infected.
I mean, there's a classic example of this from foot and mouth disease, which is what I used to model once upon a time. And that nobody actually records whether they're talking about the R0 within a herd or between herds. Yeah. And they're totally different numbers. They're totally unrelated to one another. But people just blithely talk about it as if there's just one number here. Yeah.
So for me, the missingness was a slightly different issue. It's ultimately the same, right? It's quality of the data. When there is no data, clarify why there is no data. When the data, and tell me what the data actually is, and record numerator and denominator. For me, missingness in my experience during this pandemic has been in hospitals. Hospitals are typically very good at recording when people come in hospital, when people go to ICU and so on. But then once people recover and leave the hospital, then they're not really recorded as an event leaving the hospital, because everything is good, everything is well. And so in particular, that made very difficult early on to understand how long people spend in hospital for, because you would never know whether, if a cell is blank, is because the person has exited but you haven't recorded that, or the person has not left the hospital yet. And so you have like people in hospital for 100 days or more potentially, and you're like, no, that's clearly not right. So missingness, it's in the same idea, but it was a bit different for me compared to how the change of the meaning of the data over time. And the other was the data linkage. There was quite a bit about data linkage, so I suspect it's easy to find a place in the paper. The only thing I have in mind there is, for example, we know how many people are vaccinated currently in the pandemic, and we know how many people go to hospital. It would be nice to know if some of the people that go to hospital had been vaccinated before, but at the moment we can't yet link these two data set. So in many cases you lose quite a lot of power because the data is not directly linked.
I think there are lots and lots of issues to do with linkage, and I think there are big problems with it, but it will be really exciting to be able to link things better. I tried to capture a little bit of that in my discussion on linkage, but I think there are very serious problems with too much linkage, however exciting it may be for the modelers.
I've seen it appear somewhere, so I suspect that's just, I can add a sentence where it comes in the paper and it's not a problem. And I don't know whether it was particularly something we want particularly to say, but it's typically not necessarily that easy for data collectors and data cleaners to get scientific recognition. Maybe it's not like this in the data world, where you kind of you praise each other for recording the data well and keeping the data well. But typically when you do a paper, some of the data is absolutely essential. You can have gotten to the result without the paper, and then maybe you put the data collectors as authors of your first publication, but then all of the subsequent publications, for example, they don't. You don't.
We have had that somewhere, but I can't remember whether, if it wasn't in this paper, maybe it's in the policy or something.
We had a
There's
bit of a
certainly-
chat about that last time, didn't we? Saying that
Yeah.
there was a sort of crossover there between when you talk about skills and the difficulty of motivating people to do some of that work, the recognition is part of it, and whether there's a cross link to policy, the policy paper somewhere there.
It is there.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. That's brilliant. And then all the others really are either stuff that I added in my text or stuff that I don't think fits in the data paper. For example, the fact that collectible data is only indirectly informing the transmission process. And so you need to combine multiple data streams. So that's more of an estimation thing, really, rather than a data problem.
Maybe in terms of data linkage, the challenge, maybe a challenge is that modelers and statisticians need to demonstrate the value of linking different data sets, that because all these questions about privacy is always balanced against how valuable it is to the public.
Yeah, it's a valid point. What in practice I feel has happened is that, well, different organizations, you can't really link the data that easily, but within the same organization, the NHS, for example, if there was one unique identifier for your NHS number, like a scrambled version of your NHS number, for example, then at least I would know whether you've gone to hospital or you've been vaccinated. But
and we have that in Scotland, and so we do talk about that. So that kind of linkage already exists inside the UK. It's just that it's not being done in England.
Yeah, but then if instead you kind of collect one data set and then you anonymize it, so you collect all the hospital.
I mean, the point is that's a solved problem in Scotland. It's just that it's not being done in England. So it's a really easy recommendation. Because for instance, the sequencing data can be directly attributed to a human being in the NHS system in Scotland, but not in England. So that kind of stuff is up and running and working as far as I understand it.
I mean, it's not working massively well.
Okay, but it should be working. It needs.
There's a glimmer of hope that it will work one day.
We'll call it working in principle. The one thing I wanted to, since Nigel claimed that I was in charge, I'm not quite sure why. One thing I wanted to ask was, if we are going to restructure it and move this 8.2 into other sections, what sections do we actually want? Because people keep on talking about the fact this paper is too long. I don't have a strong opinion about how long the paper ought to be, but academics may do. But at the moment we've got 7 headings. We've got data engineering, data models, data platforms, data institutions, data policies, data skills, and data ecosystems. And to me, data platforms, data institutions, and possibly even data ecosystems may all be the same thing. But I'm not, I'm not sure how many, if we're going to compress and interleave things, I'm not sure how many, I think that I'm not sure how many separate sections, because I think once you create a new section, then it kind of expands to fill the space available. I'm just wondering how many sections we actually need and whether people have opinions on that.
Well, I would say that I'm sort of leaning towards the idea that the final one is really the discussion. It's sort of bringing it all together. So it's kind of really the discussion.
The data ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we did kind of have a conversation around that a couple of weeks ago.
Right. Okay.
And then I guess if we lose 8.2, we're losing 1 anyway.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, Richard suggested that, and it was also occurred separately to me. So it seems a way, if it's feasible for people to do it, but I realize it's a lot of work. But if you went through and sort of picked off the bits of 8.2 that illustrate the things in, well, a lot of 8.1, for example, and then in 8.3, it would be quite interesting to see what's left, how much of it you could actually easily use to illustrate more generic points. It might be a way of trying to see if it's feasible anyway.
Yeah. Valerie, what is the suggested length of this document?
Well, we started off with 6,000, but it was a guess, and I don't think there's an issue. We've now got about 8,000, haven't we?
I think it's actually 9,000 if I look at my Word document.
But some of it will condense a bit. You know, Lorenzo's list at the beginning, for example, will get deleted when all the points have been absorbed. Other little bits. I mean, if 8.2 is distributed round, it may be become a little bit more concise there, and so on. I don't think there's a problem. You know, if it ends up as sort of 9,000. I mean, it is you know, it's an online journal, so it's not, the pages aren't real costs in any sense. So I don't think it's a big issue. We've been gradually creeping upwards in our estimates, how long each paper is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, 6,000 is a target, and I think we're realizing that it's one of those averages where everyone's going to be above average.
Yeah. I think so.
And I think so. I mean, I think it's a target in the sense that if it's more than 6,000 words, in a sense, you have to sort of justify to yourself that you can't make it shorter. But you know, if you've really got 9,000 words of good stuff to say, and you can't see a way to make it shorter without losing valuable stuff, then that will be okay. Is that? I think it's quite a good discipline to be trying as you revise to prefer shorter to longer, because particularly with a collaboration of lots of people, you know, things get out of hand if you just issued carte blanche to explain, you know, to half a dozen people to each explain their favorite topic in as many words as they feel they need. So it's
yeah, fair enough. But
so make the suggested revisions with bearing in mind that it would be nice if it got a little bit shorter, and just see where that takes us to. And I think, as Valerie says, it looks as though it should be reasonably acceptable. I mean, I think the journal doesn't, because the journal's entirely online, it's really more our own self-discipline rather than the journal saying you cannot have something of greater length.
And I guess also, given the idea of the papers as looking to the future and so on, rather than reviewing context, I guess, you know, if the papers get too long and too far away from that, the referees may make suggestions. So we don't want to give them too many targets.
Yeah, my feeling as well is at the moment we're in the kind of expanding stage, because we're sort of playing around with the structure and what have you, and so it's not surprising it's got a bit longer, but I would think it would get shorter.
Yeah, I think in our challenges, there's some things that map very one-to-one with sections, and there's some things which don't, or that they do appear in places but not on the same level as other things. I wonder if I think there's several bits which are about sort of trust and quality and that kind of thing in the challenges, and they do sort of appear in the text in various places, but is that something we want to make a sort of headline thing? You know, it's I saw it, I think it's in 8.3, there's mention of the kind of model readiness assessment, and that covers a lot of the ground that's in those challenges. So I'm just thinking, when we talk about it, there's things which are around data availability and quality of data, and then there's things which are around what you then do to promote trust. And there's some quite technical things.
So there's a specific issue that I was wondering about. I might as well get to the point. Which is that we do have a discussion that's kind of relatively long about specific data sets that we think would be useful to have. And I know this is the data, this is the data chapter, but I'm a little bit concerned that that could become an interminable list of just a million things, a wish list of a million things that nobody will ever read, because everybody has their own opinion about what ought to be collected, and whether we should really be focusing on the principles rather than the specific data sets. And I think that potentially that could save us a lot of space and focus on the
I mean, I think
frameworks and the
so
institutions.
that's at the beginning end of 8.2 is you're talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah, so I've literally just dumped that in there as a suggestion that we, because the thing is, like, originally we had this 8.2, which was a list of all the stuff that had happened in COVID, you know, all the issues, and I was kind of thinking it needed to be drawn together in some way. So I was kind of thinking like an overview, and the list I've got there is probably longer than I was thinking, but I was kind of thinking maybe even a table kind of the types of data that you would expect to need to collect in a pandemic. So a much higher level than is perhaps even there. But if we're going to get rid of 8.2, we might not even need that drawing together because it just sort of goes away.
I think it would be good if you are looking for that sort of thing to try and construct it in such a way that it would apply to a general pandemic, that not just another version of COVID-19.
Yeah. Like, how do you think about it in the early days so that you are collecting the data? And then I guess if are we having appendices and things, because you could have specific examples from this pandemic as an appendix to sort of really make it more concrete what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, if we had a kind of supplementary material which had the detail, then that would free up space in the main text. Lorenzo, what were you
I agree with your point, Richard, that it's a wish list. Like, it could be anything, and you never know what the next pandemic is going to be. For example, we had quite a lot of understanding about how schools behave, because children transmit flu more, and so that's what we were ready with. And then as soon as we realized care homes were a big problem, we realized we had no data on care homes in this pandemic, and that has kept being a problem. So if the next pandemic is a sexually transmitted infection, you'll be like, oh my God, I need information about lots of other stuff that you can't guess at the moment. So I agree with you that the wish list is just almost impossible, and everyone has their own opinion depending on exactly what they do. There is, however, while I was thinking that, it just popped to mind the fact that whatever the next pandemic is going to be, you will pick it up in hospitals, right? You'll get hospitalizations of something, no matter what that is, and the fact that now there is a lot of COVID-19 hospital data freely available. If that could stay in the future, the challenge is going to kind of allow not COVID-19 data streams to be publicly available, but whatever data stream of the new infection. But it's still going to come from hospitals, and there will always be the same challenges of hospital data not being necessarily publicly available to start with. But at the moment it has been for COVID-19, and so I'm expecting, if we could get hospital data early on, that would solve a lot of problems.
It does feel to me like that could be cast as an issue to do with fair data and metadata, though, so that if we enforce the release of the metadata to tell us what's being monitored, then we actually know, rather than having to guess at what hospitals might be collecting, and B, we'd be able to influence decisions about what to monitor in the future as we come up with new, ever more terrible scenarios for the next pandemic.
That sounds great. The main problem I was talking about was just public availability. But yes, metadata is absolutely crucial, and I'm very happy to kind of keep things structured.
But I do think that there are broad categories. So like the top of that list, it talks about summary statistics and data on individuals and data on the population. I mean, all these things are almost always going to be needed, in the nature of them changes, but there is some sort of structure there that seems relatively generic. So
I think it does feel to me like there is another point here. You know, there's, like you say, there's all the ways that everything being more fair would help with that, but there is this separate point of is the right data even being collected, and they have an influence on each other, but I think there's a bit of a danger if you structure everything around fair. There's so many sort of opinion papers like that, aren't there, where, you know, it's fair in whatever discipline, and there's a lot of quite generic things. So I think it is quite good to have that element, but not have that be the entire paper and put everything into that structure.
No, fair enough. So what's our plan for the next week, I guess, is the big question. Alice, you wrote that 8.7. Is that your document, the 8.7 skills and roles that was edited this morning?
I haven't edited it this morning, but I did originally write it.
Oh, right. I guess somebody did.
Ian might have been going to contribute as well, I think. So yes, I always wonder. It feels like, yeah, the places I can contribute are in that skills area, and then there's a whole lot in the challenges, which is about that sort of quality and trust thing, and it's how far do we want to go into software as well as strictly data quality, for instance. Does that fit in this paper versus other papers?
Yeah, I don't
Is
know.
there more detail under data engineering, for instance, about, you know, possible solutions to some of these problems in a sort of data engineering sense? So it's not 100% clear to me what I should focus on. Or
do people involved in the modelling and estimation papers have sections in there on quality and assessment of and openness of models and estimation procedures and so on and so forth? Is that all in there?
There's kind of mentioning of open models in the modelling paper. I'm not sure it's in the estimation paper.
No, we talk a bit about differences between models and consistency and differences between them, but I don't think there's specific mention of openness.
We had this conversation at the beginning when I was saying, does it actually make sense to try to put things about software engineering in this data paper, for instance? And I think people said that the modelling paper was not really focusing on it was more about the conceptual modelling discussion. Is that right? The sort of, yeah.
I mean, I think that if we are going to put it into this paper, then that's absolutely fine. I think it's it needs to be somewhere, but I think we need to make sure that the modeling paper and the estimation paper reference this paper and say,
yeah,
you know, there's a specific discussion about software quality and, you know, along with data quality and data traceability and so on.
That's what I was wondering. A lot of our section headings at the moment, it's data something, and if we were using quite a broad definition of data, I think, as in there's this whole pipeline that includes input data and modeling and then output data and conclusions, and if we mean it in that very broad sense, then it absolutely does fit. But when you read the headings and it says data engineering, data quality, that's not where my mind immediately goes, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably worth saying, given that 5 of us here are from SCRC, that our definition of data included code.
But I think if you said this is the data paper, or you read some of those headings, that wouldn't be what you expected. I just wonder if there's any tweaks to the way we phrase the titles or something.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, we can probably just remove the word data from the title of each section and just say, you know, engineering and.
Or if we make it clear somewhere in the introduction that when we say data, we mean this whole pipeline that.
Yeah, maybe it's gone, but I had some idea there was a kind of initial comment that data was interpreted broadly to mean, you know, data and sort of analysis and models. But
because if modeling results are part of your data and everything that leads to them, you know, that's.
I think the reason why it belongs here, I think, is that otherwise the pre-processing data cleaning side of stuff will never be touched anywhere. And indeed some of the estimation stuff is really a data issue that you want to extract something before you start to do the real estimation of the things you really care about.
And your chain of things that, you know, combines data, does things with data, you know, produces more data. A lot of the bits in that chain are in fact software. So, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it would make no sense to try to separate. Yeah.
We do talk about software and estimation, but it's more in relation to having software which is general purpose for specific estimation
Yeah,
challenges.
there might be
So-
a little place you could have a small
Right.
paragraph that said, of course, there's all these issues around trust and quality in software,
Yeah.
and this is discussed further over here.
Yeah. So yeah, we've already made several references to sections in the data paper, but I think that's another one that we
Yeah.
could definitely add.
I
Yeah.
feel like there is a little section I could write somewhere that would be useful for this. You know, we did that whole sort of panel session, didn't we, on collaborations between research software engineers and modelers during COVID and the different ways that worked. And I feel like there's something useful to be said there somewhere.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm aware we're running out of time, but Glenn, were you volunteering to try to interleave some of the before Nigel left, to try to interleave some of the COVID experience into the? Did I imagine that?
I certainly think you did, yeah. So I think what I inadvisedly volunteered to, I think, was try and rework 8.3, including 8.24, which are the kind of lessons learned from COVID,
Right, okay.
essentially to do, but maybe to try and restructure it in that new challenge recommendation format.
Okay,
So
well, I might try, in that case, I might try and interleave some of the lived experience stuff into 8.1. And yeah, I mean, Alice, I mean, you really, I mean, it might be worth actually just putting 8.7, try to put what you've written into 8.7.
Yeah, yes. And then the couple of bits in the challenges that I think they're mentioned places, but I could try to just write some words in a separate document again about that, and then we say which bits are covered somewhere, which is there a section.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of challenges in 8.7 with the data skills that, I mean, I'm not sure if it doesn't need to be promoted up the document to I mean, exactly what Lorenzo said, that there's no credit given to people who collect data. I mean, you know, because most of our work is done in sub-Saharan Africa, we, you know, nearly all the work in every project we're involved in is done by the people collecting the data, because it's just a huge amount of work to set up the infrastructure to collect the data, and exactly this issue that the data, that there's not proper credit given for that huge.
Yeah, it seems to me like a whole lot of this fits into maybe 3 broad categories. Like one of them is having those right teams with all those different skills available and doing all these roles getting done, you know, all these things that we know are needed to achieve getting done, and putting those teams together. Then one is more about where does the data come from, and is it being collected, and, you know, how can people who are being asked to do things in a modeling sense influence that or not. And then one is more like the technical platforms, and what can you have already ready to use, you know, in terms of infrastructure and
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
maybe
and I think
in
a
the
lot
end,
of
all these
this,
sections come in one or the other, you know.
I've never actually got to the end of this paper, but I think that the future data ecosystems really does need to say that this needs to be set up in advance, because otherwise it's never going to happen.
But I do wonder if we can group those things into sort of tools, platforms, ecosystems, stuff, facilities that people could call on, that are quite generic, and then maybe a little bit about what you do in a specific pandemic with those things, you know, is it all completely generic or not? The data availability and collection and quality side, and then the getting all the right skills and people and roles in teams and the challenges of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the lived experience there is going to be quite straightforward from our perspective, that we could basically find no volunteers to do the data side of stuff because it wasn't considered to be sexy, whereas we had hundreds of volunteers to help with the modeling, which is obviously not very helpful without the data.
I think also because the people to do the data side of it, we were wanting people who understood the domain, weren't we, really?
Well, not entirely. There was a lot of real grunt work that nobody was willing to do. So I had to coerce one of my postdocs into doing it, you know, which isn't really an ideal situation.
I mean, it might not help that RAMP didn't explicitly advertise for that, if you see what I mean.
No.
That's a lesson. Yeah. Yeah.
And Lorenzo, were you going to try to interleave these remaining bullet points that you don't see in the text into somewhere?
Yeah, happily, yeah. I don't think there is really much else to do in terms of the bullet points. I think most of them are covered. Maybe it's one sentence or two somewhere, but it's pretty much covered. Like that was like me brainstorming, and then obviously many of the things I'm saying have already been covered by you guys quite well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could also add them to that challenges document, just so that, I mean, insofar as they are challenges, just so that we have a permanent record, so we make sure we don't delete them later when we're cleaning stuff up.
I mean, was there an implication we might be restructuring things a bit more based on that challenges document, though? Like, as in write all the content and then say, do we turn the whole thing round to say, you know, challenge?
Well, that's kind of what I was doing this week, with adding in the challenges every couple of paragraphs. And I think we're kind of going ahead with that. I wasn't, I only got a very small amount of the way through the document.
Yeah.
But I think it was a good approach, in my opinion. If at least you know what you really want to say, it's easier to kind of structure the document in order to say it.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. Min, I guess has there been any further progress with the kind of visualization paper?
I think I wrote a section on visualization challenges. It's a separate document inside the chapter 4. So I guess it's probably for the whole team to decide, are those challenges part of the special issue? If those challenges are a special issue, then we have evidence to confirm those challenges can potentially be met, and we can also make a recommendation. So it's really just for that. And in my view, I strongly believe it is the case, because all the things we talk about in this meeting, like the quality of the data and the missing data and so on, in the emergency case, and I personally believe, and those things cannot be perfectly solved in any situation. So most important thing is for the provider technology, so the modeling scientists can see what is missing, what data potentially is wrong, and what modeling result may not match with the data. It could be a data problem, could be model problem, and all those things. And the ability to spot those problems at the fingerprints, at the fingertip, is really, really just important. And they need to have a minimal amount of time to spend on looking at the data. The data just readily available to them. To me, not only just for the modeling scientists, in fact, for the regional epidemiological management and the ability to access data, to see the data, in my view, data should be just right up front. I always tell my own visualization team is to just imagine a modeling scientist and a local healthcare manager. Every morning they're coming in while they are still brushing their teeth, and they would like to just go onto their computer, quickly look at the yesterday's data to see how the modeling results matched. And we don't have anything like that available to them. And that is what we are doing, and in the providing infrastructure level support. In the UK, if you're taking England and Scotland together and Wales, and there's over 100 modeling teams there, there's no way you can support each individual team in that way unless you have an infrastructure. And so infrastructure should be there. There should be dashboard for each modeling scientist. Every modeling scientist is like a general to say, those are the data I need to see every day. And it should be right in front of me if I switch on my computer. And that is what we try to achieve. And I'm hoping the team will take that on board, as this is a challenge. And but on the hand, if the team decides this is not a part of the challenge, we just take the paper to somewhere else. So.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that document that got into Dropbox. I just opened it now. I mean, it does look good. I think it would get drowned out given how long the data paper already is. I think it would get drowned out if it was inside the data paper rather than its own paper. But but I can't speak for academics. But last week certainly they were sounding enthusiastic about having visualization challenges paper.
Yeah, I think we were assuming that would go ahead. and encourage you to do that. I think that would be but really good to have that as a separate paper, because as Richard says, this one is already getting long and there are some important points. So putting them into a separate paper where you've got space to, really to elucidate them would be good. And then you can just cross-refer from this one, which will make it a bit simpler here.
Yeah, we might even be able to offload some of the stuff from this paper into your paper if it's looking a bit short.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, getting the two to fit well together would be good.
I think there's there's cross links from the skills bit, there's cross links from the kind of data engineering platform side, and there's cross links from the modeling workflow, how modelers work.
Yeah, I think
they can be quite short in this paper.
Yeah. I think what Lorenzo mentioned, a particular scenario was really, really important about the from the individual instance, and that they can guess. This is actually what we, from a human computing point of view, is we call the unconscious knowledge use, because the domain experts, modeling scientists, has a huge amount of knowledge. They see a little bit of instance, they can generalize that instance to a kind of statistics. They may not be accurate, but when the data is not there, they can using this instance-based inferred statistics to actually change their model. So their ability to see the data, even the data is not correct or not, somehow they can use this knowledge really. The problem we have in this entire COVID management is the cost for them to see the data is just too heavy. They get to the spreadsheet, they have to go to there to plot it out, to see it. And you can't do it every day, the modeling science. Those are not the best of use their time. So that means if they use a lot of time on these things, that means they cannot use their time to think.
To be frank, there is also a lot of randomness in this process, right? One day you're like, I suddenly realize it's really important to do this. You sit down, you try to do a scrape for all the data you find. Yeah. At the beginning, when there was a call in Science.BY to kind of work out models that to kind of do short-term forecast of how the epidemic would go in the next 2 weeks, and it was just after the lockdown, and then I just looked at the hospital data we had available, and it was not age structured. So I built a model without age structure. Then the age structure became available later on, but I moved to other things, and then I didn't want to go back and so on. So sometimes what ends up in the model, it's a bit of a random result of what data is available at the time you have brain space to think about formulating the model. And then even if data becomes available later on, but you don't have that brain power, you don't have time, you are tired because you've worked flat out in the past week to build your previous model, then somehow that data doesn't get used. And it's not a fault of the data or the data collectors. It's just the randomness of the entire kind of emergency response process. But certainly, so now we receive a lot of data. At least since BIAM, there has been quite a lot of work to kind of pull together lots of different data streams. And there is no one who is using all of the data streams. Like every group has basically kind of specialized on some data streams. Some are more relevant than others. Typically hospitals appear in quite a few models, and others are just not. But every now and then there is the random person that says, I've been looking at the 111 calls data. And it just comes out with a description of that data, which is telling a story. If the story is consistent with the story told by other people that look at different data, then we agree on what's happening. So it's good to have the data available. Whether it's included in the model is a bit of a result of a random process, but someone hopefully will use it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't have any comments, but I think it's good. I would definitely move forward to the paper to make us possibly look into a separate one. Yeah.
Right. Okay, I think people are probably running out of time. We're a quarter of an hour over already, so we should probably call it a day. But I think there's probably lots to do for next week anyway. Cool. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.